I welcome you all here. The reason that we're here is that South River Public Schools are very lucky and fortunate to have Miss Jodee Blanco here with us to deliver a very important message about anti-bullying and to shed some light as to how parents and children can work together and learn some skills so that children are not bullied and they know that they have a sacred person to go to. So thank you for being here, and South River Public Schools welcome you. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Hi everybody. Before I begin, I have to acknowledge a few people. First and foremost, Tony Rosano over there. This guy is adorable and lovable, and he has been my champion for the longest time. He's read my books and he kept calling me and said, I'm getting you to South River, I'm getting you to South River. And he was tireless, he would not give up until he did. He's attended every single presentation, and in my mind I'm thinking he must be bored to tears, but yet he still shows up. And because I was a drama major and a journalism major, and I grew up on the stage, there's a connection there because he understands what I'm doing from a theatrical perspective. So he really loves this community. And Nicole and Sylvia here have been heroic. I didn't know this, but New Jersey is a very highly regulated state. So you have to fill out so much paperwork that, I mean, at first I thought maybe I'm part of this whole Mueller investigation and this is just a front. So they have been magnificent, and I can tell you that you have a remarkable district and really good people. So, and one other compliment, and this is deeply sincere. I do my program, it's called INJA, it's not just joking around, all around the world. And I go into schools and districts, and I do student workshops, student seminars, a faculty workshop, which I'm doing tomorrow, and then parent-family seminars. And I go to so many schools, and I reach so many thousands of people, it's hard to remember. They all become a blur after a while. But the remarkable ones stick out. And at the high school, I experienced something rare. The kids at that high school are so open and so accepting and so honest. And the way any school works is that the vibe of the school, the spirit of the school, is a direct reflection of the principal. I can tell you what a school environment is going to be the first 5 minutes that I meet the principal. If the principal is cold and judgmental and didactic, the kids are going to be cold and judgmental, and the staff too. If the principal is warm and kind and fair, so will the atmosphere of the school. And at this high school, and I give you credit for this, and I know you say you're new, but I think you're both new, but you have so much vibe coming off of your pores, it cancels out the new. And South River High School is one of the top 12 high schools I've ever been to in my life, as far as the culture of the school. So whatever you're doing, not that he takes crap, he doesn't, just so everybody knows. Okay. So this is what I do. I go into schools. And from 5th grade through high school, the reason I do this is because from 5th grade through high school, I was the kid that nobody wanted to be caught dead hanging out with. I cried myself to sleep for the same reason that so many other kids struggle to fit in, simply for being different. My school years were a nightmare. I never thought I would write about them, but I did. I wrote this book called Please Stop Laughing at Me long before bullying was part of our cultural vernacular, a decade before. And it made the bestseller list. And all of a sudden, kids from all around the world started emailing me wanting my help. So I gave up my career in the business side of entertainment and PR, and I started answering these cries one at a time, and that morphed into my comprehensive in-school program. And something very interesting has happened along the way. When I was touring, and as I tour all these schools, I talk to students. And I ask them, tell me the things the grown-ups in your life, meaning teachers and parents and administrators, tell me the things they do that has helped you, and tell me the things they do that has made your life way worse. And all the answers I get from these kids are the same things that I had listed in my journal 40 years earlier. Made me realize the world may change, but the adolescent heart remains the same. It seeks belonging, and when it can't find the belonging that it seeks, it blisters with pain and retreats. What I'm going to do with you tonight over the next hour is I'm going to share with you all the things your kids want you to know, but either don't know how to express it or are afraid to tell you. Now, before I go there, I'm going to give you a brief background of what happened to me in school, because you need to trust me. And I can't just assume that I'm going to get your trust. I need to earn it. So I'll earn it by laying myself bare. I was a different kid. School for me was a nightmare. In 6th grade, I was the outcast. In 7th grade, I got jumped by a group of popular kids because I had stood up for a student with Downs. They shoved snow down my throat until I choked, and they ran off and they left me there. I found notes in my locker telling me, "We hate you. You're nothing but a freak." I got invited to parties. I remember I got invited once to a party in high school, and I was so excited. And my mom took me to get my makeup done and my hair done. And on the night of the party, my dad says, "Well, why don't you take the car?" And I got in the car, and I drove to the address of the party. I was so excited. It was a parking lot of a forest preserve. And all the kids came out and they spat at me. And they said, like, we would ever invite you to a party. And they sped off and left me there. In high school, no one would let me sit with them at lunch. No one. So I ended up eating in the bathroom every day, protein bars and Snickers bars that I would shove in my backpack. I never got invited to a party. I never got invited to a dance by a boy from school. I never was included in any of the cool events. I was by myself. And my experience is not isolated. Everyone always asks me, what's the worst thing about being bullied? The worst thing for me wasn't all the friendship and acceptance I was being denied by my classmates. It was all the love and friendship I had to give. I kept giving it to them, and they kept throwing it back in my face like it was nothing. And after a while, it backed up into my system and poisoned my spirit. What I tell kids when I give my talk, and the little ones get a different version than the older kids, but it's the same core message. And what I tell them is 3-tiered. First, bullying isn't just the mean things you do. It's all the nice things you never do. Letting someone sit alone at lunch, letting someone walk to class alone, always picking someone last every time when you're asked to divide into teams. That it's all bullying. I also tell kids that if you struggle to fit in, there is nothing wrong with you. It's often everything that's right about you that can make you a target of judgmentalism or exclusion. And I tell them not to change for anyone, to remain true to themselves. And lastly, I tell kids, it's not just joking around. When you roll your eyes at someone, or look down on them, or laugh at them behind their back, or simply treat them as if they're invisible, you're damaging that person for life. And I know, well, because I'm damaged. Tonight, I'm going to take you on a guided tour of the hearts of the kids that are in your lives. Are we ready? Oh, come on, what kind of energy is that? Are we ready? Yeah. We're small, but we are not meek. Now, I have, Sophia, you're here with your mom, right? And we have another child in the audience, and what is your name? Isabel? Isabella. Okay, now you guys are going to help me with this, all right? So you have a job, so pay very close attention. I am going to list all the things that a parent should never say to a child if that kid is being bullied. If any of the things on my list are things that maybe one of your parents have said to you, this is what I want you to do. You'll be my able volunteer. I want you to tug on their sleeve, and I want you to say, see, I told you so. I was right and you were wrong. Okay? Can you remember that? Thank you. You're a fabulous volunteer. Okay? So these are the things you should never say to a bullied child, and why. Ignore the bullies and walk away. Ignore them and walk away. Now, why is that bad advice? You're imposing adult logic in adolescent and tween thinking. In the world of adults, if someone is annoying you on purpose and you ignore it, they will stop. In the world of kids, it's the opposite. The more you ignore the bullies, the meaner they get until they elicit a response. And bear in mind, there are two kinds of popular kids in a school. The elite leader is a member of the cool crowd who's kind and inclusive. The elite tormentor is the mean member of the popular crowd. And beware of the elite tormentors in your communities. These are often the kids that get the best grades, volunteer for community service, do extracurricular activities, know exactly what they want to be when they grow up, and respect their elders. They're like the perfect kids. And no one suspects that they're sending other students home in tears every night, not because of the cruel things they do, but because of the kindness they never give. And if you're being bullied by a group of elite tormentors and you ignore those kids, they have egos. They don't like to be ignored. And the more you ignore them, the meaner they will get. So your advice is the opposite effect. Additionally, what's the one thing we tell kids all over America? Don't be a bystander. If you see somebody getting picked on, get up and defend that person. Then why is it we'll turn around and say to that same child, oh, but you're being bullied, just ignore it and walk away? Isn't that a mixed message? Aren't we in effect asking that child to be a bystander in their own life? And then we wonder why 20 years from now that child will be taken advantage of. Because we set the precedent by telling this child to ignore abuse. We should never tell a child to ignore abuse. The second thing you should never say to a bullied child is, leave them alone and they'll leave you alone. Leave them alone and they'll leave you alone. Why is that bad advice? Oh, go ahead and tug. No problem. Why is that bad advice? We don't want to be left alone. We're already lonely. We don't want those mean kids to leave us alone. We want them to like us. We want them to invite us to their way cool parties. We don't want them to leave us alone. That's our whole problem. We're already so lonely. Grown-ups never understand. The third thing you should never say to a bullied child is, they're just jealous. They're just jealous, or you threaten them so they put you down to build themselves up. Now, why is that bad advice? Well, every time a well-meaning adult said that to me, you know what I would scream inside my head? Who cares why I don't fit in? That's all grown-ups ever do is talk and explain stuff. I don't want any more explanations. I want action. I want to know how I can get invited to that party on Saturday night. Grown-ups never get it. And I also used to think, why is it that we, the victims of bullying, are always expected by the grown-ups to be the bigger people? Why is it the grown-ups are always saying to us things like, rise above it, consider the source, turn the other cheek, the worm will turn, be the bigger person? Why doesn't anyone ever expect the mean kids to be the bigger people? I mean, isn't it bad enough that we already have the pressure of having to go to school every day, scared we're going to be humiliated? And on top of that, we have the added pressure of knowing that if we don't rise above it, or at least pretend to be the bigger person, we're going to disappoint the adults too. It's not fair. Now, why do we find ourselves giving kids these cliches that, if we're really honest, they're the same cliches our parents told us, and they didn't work then either. So why are we relying on them? Well, for one thing, with "they're just jealous," we fall for one of the big myths of bullying. Let me explain. The reason we tell a child they're just jealous is because we think if that child has a logical reason of why they don't fit in, that they can process intellectually, they will take the rejection less personally and will feel better, correct? But here's the problem with that, everyone. Once again, you're imposing adult thinking onto a kid. And kids can't think like adults. Because in order for a kid to think like an adult, they have to have the emotional maturity of an adult. And emotional maturity isn't an arbitrary thing that some kids reach earlier than others. Emotional maturity is a neurological event in which the frontal lobe of the brain completes its development. It happens typically in the early 20s. Until then, the parts of the brain that control impulse, emotion, anger, response mechanisms are still underdeveloped. That is adolescence. So expecting a child to think like an adult is as ludicrous as looking at a kindergartner and commanding her to grow 3 inches immediately, or it's no dessert for you. Now, most of us know this. So then why do we still rely on that old cliche of "they're just jealous"? Because the typical profile of the bullied student fools us into believing they are adults. The typical profile of the bullied student is what I call the ancient child. You guys know this student. You might refer to this kid as an old soul. This is the student who is typically more verbally, socially, and intellectually sophisticated than their peers. They typically are extremely articulate and can express themselves like an adult. In fact, when you're speaking to them, it's almost as if you're speaking to another adult. You forget they're a kid because they're so prepossessing, they're so outgoing, they're so confident. They would often rather watch CNN than play video games. They also exhibit a compassion and an empathy far beyond their years that makes other kids think they're weak or weird, and makes adults often label them as overly sensitive, which burns me. These kids are not overly sensitive. It's just that by the comparison of their mainstream classmates who aren't sensitive enough, we label them overly sensitive, but they're not. Their classmates aren't sensitive enough. So instead of trying to make the majority of kids who aren't as sensitive as they should be more sensitive, instead we make the ones who are compassionate, who are sensitive, feel bad. What is wrong with us? And the thing about the ancient child is, I don't care how mature that child is on the outside. On the inside, that child is just as driven by the desperate need to fit in as any other kid the same age. And we really don't want another grown-up explanation for our trouble. We want you to tell us, how can I get the kids at school to like me? The next thing you should never say to a bullied child, and there's lots of versions of this, but this is the one I always got. 20 years from now, Jodee, you are going to be a famous writer, and all these kids who are picking on you are going to be in jail or worse. 2 of them actually did go to jail. But it never made me feel better, because you know what I used to think in my head when I heard that? Who cares about 20 years from now? Who cares about when I'm older or when I'm in college? I hurt now. Everybody's going to the mall after school, and I wanted to go too. And when I asked, they just laughed in my face. And this Saturday, there's going to be this way Gucci party. It's going to be savage. There's going to be no adults there. Like, I can't even. And I kept waiting for an invitation all week. And then I finally saw this little slip of paper in my locker, and I thought, oh my gosh, it's an invitation. And then when I opened it, it said, we hate you. I don't care about 20 years from now or when I get older. I'm dying now. To a kid, the future is after school, and the distant future is Saturday night. And the last thing you should never say to a bullied child is, oh, I know how you feel. It never failed. I would finally muster up the courage to confide in an adult what was going on, and I barely got a couple of sentences out, and the well-meaning adult would interrupt. You guys are very interruptish. They would interrupt, and they would say, oh, Jodee, I know how you feel. When I was in 8th grade, and then the whole conversation would be about them. And I remember asking myself, why is it that every single conversation with a grown-up always, somehow, no matter what, ends up being about their childhood? They are so annoying. So what should you do? And what should you say? I'm going to go through with you how to intervene with a bullied child one-on-one, or any child in crisis. But before I go there, I want to talk to you about the difference between authority and emotional credibility. Authority is something you have over a child. Emotional credibility is when your child trusts you enough to believe in you and open up to you. So many parents think that just because they have authority, they also have credibility. Not true. This is especially challenging for step-parents. There are 3 tenets of emotional credibility. The first tenet is specificity. The more specific you are when you communicate with kids, the more validated they feel. The more general you are, the more dismissed they feel. The 2 expressions kids hate the most are, we'll see, and let's think about some things we can do. The reason they hate we'll see is because kids know when mom or dad says we'll see, it's just dumb old grown-up speak for that probably means no, or I just don't want to deal with this right now. And so they feel dismissed. They don't like, let's think about some things we can do, because kids don't want to think when they're in pain. Kids are doers. We're the ones who sit on our butts way too long and think about things. Kids do. And that's not a bad quality. So, here's a tip. The next time your child is bugging you about something, and you feel it's sort of like a belch, you feel it coming out, that we'll see, instead, try this tactic. say to your child, I can't give you an answer right now because I have to think about it, or I have to talk to your father, whatever it is. I need a little time. So let's meet again tomorrow at this specific spot in person, and I'll give you my decision. But before we leave right now, I'd like you to explain to me specifically why this thing you're asking of me is so important to you. Help me understand why. And then let them explain it. And then say thank you for sharing that information with me. And then the next day, when you give them your decision, if it's yes, explain specifically why. If it's no, explain specifically why. You're giving yourself the same wiggle room as we'll see, but you're making your child feel validated instead of dismissed because you were specific about your process. And the real value of this is that your child will learn how to accept no with grace, because they will feel as if they've been respected through the tenet of specificity. Does that make sense? The third tenet of emotional credibility is semantics. All that means is positioning. Present it the way you want it perceived. So often, we don't think before we speak. And if you use the wrong word, it can harm a child. There's nothing wrong with hesitating and thinking of what you want to say before you say it. We'll talk more about semantics as I go through the intervention steps. So how do you intervene with a child in crisis one-on-one while simultaneously reinforcing emotional credibility? Step number one, you're going to sit down with the child. There's a few rules about this. When you sit down with the child, everybody's digital devices are off. Number two, there are two types of locations in a home: neutral and stigmatized. Same thing in a school. A neutral location is any location in a home that kids associate with warm, happy, fun family time. Maybe it's the game room, or the family room, or the yard. Stigmatized locations are any locations that kids say, uh-oh, if my parents want to talk to me in there, I'm in trouble. Do the intervention in a neutral location so their defenses aren't up. Now, when you sit down, be aware of your body language, okay? I'll show you. You don't want to lean back because that suggests I'm bored. You don't want to lean forward because that suggests I'm in a rush. You don't want to cross your legs or cross your arms because you know what that says when you cross your legs when you're sitting with a kid? Linguistically, the optic of it is, I'm the adult, you're the kid. I'll listen, but I'm still going to know best. Rather, you want your shoulders back. I call these apples. That's what Sister Rose Agatha calls them. Apples against the back of the chair. Deep cleansing breath. Open, compassionate eye contact. That's 101 standard intervention posture. Now, when you're sitting down with your child and all the devices are off, make sure your child understands that no one is getting up off these seats until your child talks to you. And even if that takes 9 hours, no one's getting out of the seats until there's a conversation. Then, step number 2, you say to your child, I don't know how you feel. I can't imagine what you're going through. It must be awful. I don't know how you feel. I can't imagine what you're going through. It must be awful. And then be quiet and wait. Now there's going to be an awkward silence. Resist the urge to fill it in, especially with an, oh, I know how you feel. If you remain silent and no one is allowed to get up, eventually your child will speak. And even if they say something nonsensical like, the moon is blue, they're kids. There will be some subliminal connection there. You just have to listen creatively. Now, I warn you, sometimes when a child is opening up for the first time about a crisis, especially bullying, everything comes tumbling out at once in this giant catharsis. And sometimes they will inadvertently admit to something having nothing to do with why they're talking to you that normally you would punish them for. For example, well, when I was in the bathroom sticking a cigarette with Brianna, Susie... Don't stop the intervention to deal with whatever slipped out. Because if you do, that child is going to feel like you're punishing them for trusting you. Pretend like you didn't hear it. Forget it. Keep going. Keep going. Then at the end of the intervention, revisit it and say, by the way, that thing that slipped out, I'm not going to punish you because I'm so proud of you for opening up to me tonight. But let you and I discuss a 3-point plan of action on how we can help you avoid making that mistake again. Then come up with a plan of action, write down 3 action items of what you're going to do together to help your child avoid that mistake, sign it and date it like a contract, and both of you work to honor it. You're teaching your child the value of contracts, the value of negotiation, the value of documentation, and you're working in partnership to help them avoid a mistake as opposed to punishing them. After your child is opened up, step number 3, you say, let's talk about an action that we can take together today to address the challenge you're facing. Now let's break that down into semantics. Let's talk as opposed to let's think about some things we can do, because kids don't want to think. They can think later. An action, a specific action, tenet number 1, where your child can say to themselves, my parents said they were going to take a specific action, this is the specific action they took, and this is the specific result. That we can take together, reinforcing advocacy. Today, that's another tenet I didn't mention, but it's a biggie. Immediacy vocabulary. Today, when you're dealing with a child in crisis, they need to hear words out of your mouth that connote now, today, this afternoon, this morning, because it makes them feel like an emotional priority. That we can take together today to address the challenge you're facing, as opposed to your problem with the kids at school, which makes us feel as if I am the problem. So you've gotten the child to open up. You've promised to take a specific action. Now what do you do? This is the single biggest mistake that adults make when dealing with bullying that leads to more desperate acts than any other oversight. You find out your child is being bullied, and you immediately spring into action. And by the way, there's 2 types of bullied students. There's the overtly bullied student who's bullied in obvious ways, and the invisible student. The invisible student isn't necessarily bullied or even intentionally excluded. They're just ghosts in the school. It's like they don't exist. Both types suffer irreparable damage. Some toggle between both types. So you find out your child is being bullied or invisibilized, and you immediately spring into action with the school. You demand a meeting with the principal. You demand a meeting with the superintendent. You demand to know how those bullies are going to be appropriately punished. In fact, I always find it ironic that parents of bullying victims often will end up bullying the school to make sure the bullies are punished. The whole focus is on punishing the bullies. Meanwhile, over here, bleeding spiritually, is the victim. The reason victims of bullying often attempt desperate acts isn't because of the bullying. That is a myth. It's the loneliness. It's the feeling of isolation. It's the sense that nobody understands me, and if something happened to me, nobody would care. Now, the first thing you have to do when you find out your child is being bullied, before any of this, is perform triage on that bullied child. Triage comes in the form of one thing. It's called interim social life. You need to help your child find a brand new social life, completely separate from school, where they can make new friends with new faces who haven't stigmatized them as the outcast. Google the Park District, the Community Center, the library, rock fantasy camps, teen drama clubs, dance studios, martial arts clubs, botany clubs, 4-H, Reader's Theater. But do all of your Googling one township away, so that whatever your child gets involved in, it will be new people whom they don't attend school with. And as you find this information, print it out and hand it to your child, or have your child jump online with you, and make sure your child chooses the activity. Don't fall into the parent trap of saying, oh, you don't want to do that. Let your child choose the activity. This new activity will achieve 3 vital things. On the days when school is really lonely, your child can say, yeah, but I'm going to meet my real friends at drama practice. This new activity will give your child more confidence, and the more confident your child is, the less of a target they'll be at school. Additionally, bullied students tend to emit a desperate aura. And when they're getting their need for acceptance fulfilled outside of school, they're less desperate with their classmates at school. And as the desperation diminishes, the tension diminishes, and the classmates usually almost always will come around. The problem solves itself. And lastly, it will buy you the time you need over here. Because I'm not saying these things aren't important. But if you're all excited because you got a meeting with the superintendent and the principal and the parents of the bullies and the parents of the victims, and everyone's willing to work together, and it's scheduled for 2 o'clock on Thursday and 10 o'clock on Wednesday night, that bullied child does something permanently desperate, and you know what I mean. Is anyone really going to care about that meeting at 2 o'clock on Thursday when everyone's at the funeral home? Now, what do you do if your child may be the bully? Traditional punishment doesn't work. It only makes an angry child angrier and an insensitive child more insensitive. Bullying is not an act of personal hatred or aggression. It is a cry for help. This kid who was the ringleader, who was attacking the Down students, who got all of the popular kids to jump me and shove snow down my throat. He got a 10-day at-home suspension, and I felt good about that. And 20 years later, I found out that he lost weight during that detention, because the reason he was so angry during that time period and acting out was because his dad lost his job. There was no food in the house, and the poor kid was hungry. The girl who invited me to that party and stood me up and laughed in my face when it was just a parking lot of a forest preserve, 20 years later, I found out the reason she was so angry, she was crying out for help, because her dad took his own life in front of her. And her mom said, don't tell anyone. The bully is crying for help. So if your child is being if your child is being bullied, be curious. Find out as much about the bully's backstory as you can, because the more you find out about the bully's circumstances, the more compassion you're going to have for the bully. And the more compassion you have for your child's bully, the more effectively you'll be able to work in everyone's best interest. If you suspect your child is the bully, punishing the kid won't work. What I espouse is a supplemental approach called compassionate discipline. And all it means is coming up with creative opportunities where less sensitive kids can access their empathy and develop it like a muscle. I'm going to give you 2 very brief examples, and the second one will be our big finish. Let's say, for example, that you have a 13-year-old boy, and he's being really disrespectful to his grandparents. Not that any of your kids would ever be disrespectful, I'm just saying hypothetically. And he's being very disrespectful to his grandparents. So you say to him, I am taking away your cell phone until you can be nice to your grandparents. And then the next day, he's mowing their lawn and watching reruns of Lawrence Welk with them on PBS. Now, isn't that kind of a bum deal for the grandparents? I mean, they're not getting quality time from their grandchild because he loves them or he values the relationship. He's doing it to get his iPhone back. And what have you done as the parents with that traditional punishment? You've actually taught your child that his relationship with his living grandparents is the same as his relationship to a device. And we wonder why this world is so screwed up. It starts at home. Instead of that kind of a punishment, perhaps something like this. Let's say your child is being rude and disrespectful. Hand your child a notebook and a pen and say, for the next 5 days, you are going to go out of your way to perform one unexpected act of kindness for a different person each day. Immediately upon performing the act, you're going to write a sentence describing what it was, a few sentences describing the recipient's response, and a few sentences describing how their response made you feel inside your heart. Then you're going to hand the notebook to each recipient, who will sign it, date it, and provide a cell phone number. Recipients under 18, parental signature, and cell required. You're going to give me this notebook in 5 days, and I'm going to call these recipients to verify you're telling the truth. If I find out that you have not been honest, this will be your consequence, and then it's got to be a doozy. For example, it's got to be something that's going to sting and live with them the rest of their lives. For example, if they're graduating 8th grade and you have an 8th grade trip planned, you cancel it. So many parents care more about being their children's friends than their parents. And if you do, you will end up with adult children who are neither. They will neither respect you, nor will they be your friend in adulthood. Kids need parents first. Sometimes your child is not going to like you. That's healthy and that's good. I know so many parents who are terrified at the thought of their child being angry with them. Those children don't have a chance. The big finish. Let's say that you're worried because you were home making dinner and your 14-year-old daughter was on her cell phone, and this is the conversation you overheard. Like, OMG, I am so not inviting her to the sleepover on Friday. I mean, did you see what she was wearing today? But OMG, like that thing that Brianna said, savage. Oh, I am so not inviting her. I don't know, like, why you're stressing about this. Like, chillax already. I mean, did you see what she did in math class today? Like, ew, I can't even. Oh yeah, this party is going to be so Gucci, and no, I'm not going to invite her, like, LOL. I mean, oh, but you know what? I Snapchatted, like, that I wanted her to come, and she's all psyched and everything, and then, like, at the last minute, I'm going to tell her, bye-bye. And you're listening to this. And then you find out that girl, your daughter, is so not inviting to her sleepover, used to be your best friend since kindergarten, until the elite tormentor started hanging around the house. Now what are you going to do? Take away her cell phone? Ground her? It's not going to work. But you could try this. What's the one thing we want for our kids? More than anything. Unconditional love, right? We want them to experience unconditional love in their lives. Well, in order to experience unconditional love, you have got to have tolerance and compassion in your heart. And like this example of the girl on her cell phone, there's not a lot of tolerance and compassion going on there. Well, tolerance and compassion aren't qualities that you can demand into a child or punish into a child. They are qualities you have to inspire by example. Now, there's lots of ways to inspire compassion and tolerance and unconditional love. You're only as limited as your imagination, but I'm going to give you one for our big finish to get your creative juices flowing. Now, I warn you, the example I use has a specific reason. I am an animal lover and an animal rights activist. I believe that domestic animals were put here to teach us compassion, and wild animals were put here to teach us humility. So I always dedicate a portion of my work to advocating for furballs, for critters. So, like I said, there's lots of ways that you can set an example of unconditional love in the home. This is just one to get you thinking along these lines. So you heard, we have our 14-year-old girl and her cell phone conversation. And we've decided punishing her is not going to work, but maybe this might. Sit her down and explain to her about animal shelters and what can happen to pets who nobody ever wants to adopt. Then as a family, go to the nearest animal shelter and say to the manager, our family would like to schedule the next animal scheduled to be put down because nobody else wanted it. And then with your elite tormentor in training right there, this whole thing is happening with your child right there with you. And the manager is going to say, of course, well, doesn't your family want to walk up and down the rows of cages and pick a pet? And you say no, because you don't want to pick a pet the same way your son or daughter is picking who's cool enough to sit with him at lunch or who's Gucci enough to come to her sleepover. You want to set an example of unconditional love. And when that manager brings out that animal, I do not care if it is a bald, toothless, flatulent 13-year-old dog. You wrap your arms around it and you give it love and attention and kisses. And you let your child bear witness to what can happen when a spirit that's been abused and dismissed and forgotten, the same way your child may be abusing, dismissing, or forgetting certain classmates, finally gets the love and acceptance they've longed for. If you want your kids to be more patient with others, be more patient with them. If you want your kids to be more grateful, exhibit gratitude. The next time you're out shopping or at a Panera or at the mall and you see an elderly maintenance engineer bending over to pick up garbage that somebody carelessly threw on the floor, walk over with your child, introduce yourselves to that janitor, and say thank you. Thank you for keeping this place that we come to so often clean for our family. You're important to us. You mean something to us. Thank you. You are your children's greatest teachers. Your heart fills theirs. Your souls inform theirs. Your spirit nourishes theirs. So if your own heart, your own soul, and your own spirit are nourished by compassion and strengthened by truth, so too will your children's. I want to thank you for being here tonight and for loving your kids. Your story of Sophia is incredible. And you are such a good mom. You have good mom mojo all over the place. Thank you for coming and for loving your kids. And I am always here if you need me. If you want a signed copy of my book, all you have to do, my books are everywhere. Please stop laughing at me as the first, but I have a ton of them. You know, order it from Amazon or anywhere really, and shoot me an email, and I'll sign you a signed book plate so that you can put it on the inside of the book so you have a personalized book. If you just need someone to talk to or just a friendly ear, my website is jodeeblanco.com, JODEEBLANCO.com. If you're interested in having me speak, just reach out. My phone number's there, my email's there. I'm a one-woman band, and I'm extremely responsive, annoyingly so. And really, thank you for being kind to me. I never, ever take kindness for granted. And this district has been so kind, and I am so grateful, and I am so honored that you were here. Thank you. Okay, you're up. Sylvia's going to tap dance first.
Not the case. It's not happening. Again, thank you for being here tonight. This was our first Parent Academy. We're going to keep bringing more and more programs to our parents this year. Please encourage others to come and join you. We've been doing all we can to advertise these programs, and we're going to continue to do so. Please keep coming, and please encourage your friends to come along with you as well. Thank you for being here tonight. Appreciate it. And thank you to Jodee for taking the time. She's presented to our kids, to our parents, and our teachers tomorrow, really giving a cohesive, unified message to everybody in our district. So thank you to Jodee, and thank you to Nicole, who helped us organize these events as well. To our board members as well, who supported, to our principals. Just really, it does really take just a piece from everyone to bring it all together. And again, thank you for being here tonight.